to the Seoul slide. I get that, dude. I'm going to transition and you're going to see a really messy thing. Okay, y'all? Just going to let you know. It's going to be ugly. All right, you're seeing all my mess now. Now, Antonio, can you see Imposter Syndrome? Is that on? Oh, Lordy. Look at this. I've wasted 20 minutes. I'm so sorry, y'all. Yes! Yay! Okay. Alrighty. For heaven's sakes, y'all. I'm so sorry. I am so darn sorry. Okay. So, let's get going. And again, I apologize. I don't know why it didn't want to work. Okay. Imposter Syndrome. Case study in Korea. Yay! We got there. And slide. So here we go. We're talking about the character Noah in the book Pinchinko. And if you, I'm sorry, sometimes my southern accent puts extra letters or syllables in there, and I apologize heavily. So this particular passage really resonated with me because it talks about how Noah carried the story of his life as a Korean like a dark, heavy rock inside him or within him. Not a day passed when he didn't fear being discovered. And I have to say, I secretly felt that way for a very, very, very long time. So, and I asked, what character did you see yourself as? As a child. And as I said before, the character that resonated with me, and you can kind of see I was wearing like her long, big, baggy things with a long skirt. But Denise Huxtable was my role model at the time. And she was the only person or the teenager of color that I could see that I could possibly identify with in some way. Now, we're going to talk about the term transracial, and I did talk about that before. I'm not going to talk about I'll talk about it again because I may try and edit this video later for reposting. But so who is transracial? And what is transracial? So transracial is when a transracial adoptee is someone who has been raised in a family that is not the same race as their own. So that person, whom I'm not going to talk about, is not transracial, though she identified herself as such, but she was the daughter of a white family. So she's white. She was the biological daughter in this family that adopted black children. So her siblings were transracial, but she was not. Simone Biles, on the other hand, she is adopted, and she's adopted by her grandparents. So she was adopted by members of her family. So she's of the same race. Now, Colin Kaepernick, on the other hand, is a transracial adoptee. And so I want to talk about how adoptees navigate through a white world. Often we emulate our white families' ways so that we can survive in a world that doesn't reflect our true culture. Now, Colin Kaepernick played professional football until he exercised his rights as a black man in a white world. And as he began identifying as that black man, he was shut out from football, professional football. Now, let's talk about who I am. So I was adopted. They say at 13 months. However, I do believe I was a bit older. While my parents were stationed in Japan, I was adopted by a Puerto Rican man and a white Tennessean woman. My mother passed in 2001, and my father passed away in 2015. So I'm me on my own, but anyway, we called ourselves Tenericans. But that doesn't factor in the Korean part, if you will. So, as a transracial, transnational adoptee, my identity was formed by this deep desire to please and fit in within the classrooms of rural Tennessee. As a kid in Tennessee, this is what my class picture looked like the first year I was there. No matter what my upbringing was, no matter if my grandmother was with me, if my mom was with me, if my sister was with me, it didn't matter. I was always reminded that I was not white. I will say the black woman or the black girl in the center became my best friend that year. And I would end up naming my daughter after her. So, again, all I wanted to be was normal, or considered what people would call normal, which meant being a person which really meant that I was being a person my name and physical appearance would basically betray. And there were many times, as you can see here, I would wear sunglasses, and someone once said to me, "You almost look normal with sunglasses on." And that has stuck with me all these years. I wanted to be just like everybody else, and yet I was always reminded that I wasn't the same. I left Korea in 1968, only to return in 2014 for the first time. My son was 14 and struggling in a high school filled with bigger white boys. As my husband and I sat in a cafe that first trip, we discussed how our son would have more confidence if he could see men that looked like him. So I'm passing on this imposter idea to my children in some ways, because I knew nothing about the Korean culture, not enough, and I actually rejected it. So during that trip in 2014, I was struck by my likeness in the media. And after that trip in 2014, I would return every year until the pandemic. During the pandemic, I promised myself I would never die in the U.S. The pandemic made clear that I might die in the U.S., either at the hand of someone who would hate me for my face, or from a sickness no one understood at the time. But it was just so validating to see all these different people that look like me, and I was no longer this anomaly. as I would walk around in the streets of Seoul. And so we packed up 3 cats and moved to Seoul in 2015, just after my father's death. And that was an attempt to not only show our son that there was nothing wrong with him, but to also reconnect to a culture none of us understood. My husband took Korean language classes, but my son and I refused. He did ask, he was like, why don't you guys take the class with me? And in some ways, he would try to show how to sound out the characters. During that time, I'd feel embarrassed because, and it wasn't that he was trying to, degrade me or anything. He was trying to share, and I was embarrassed because I looked like I did, and yet here's this white man telling me how to read letters. I had also been warned that Korean teachers would look down on adoptees who had not learned our language. But how was I to learn if there were no options in 1970s East Tennessee? It just wasn't going to happen. So, as the pandemic ramped up, I finally had time to watch my favorite late night TV. And in late February 2020, I would be watching Late Night with Jimmy Fallon. A performance by 7 young men from Korea caught my eye. Was it the marching band beat or the dancing that moved me? This would begin an exploration of what it meant to be a teenage Korean in a rural Tennessee town in the mid-1980s.
Performing on from their new album, Map of the Soul 7, give it up for BTS!
From that one performance, I began this mass consumption of content. And I would go down a very deep rabbit hole. And it would be these things that would become my little universe here in my office during the pandemic. And they would make me laugh and all of those things. As I researched BTS and their history, my husband would walk in and ask, why was I so interested in young Korean boys? I explained that I was reliving my teens, the years of identity formation where I had no examples of what it was to be Korean. And then I would become the wife of a white man. And then again, in the isolation of the pandemic, I had time to explore my identity by watching those 7 boys. The youngest reminding me of my own son. They taught me that my mannerisms and humor were a part of my original culture and my DNA. While my body was physically in the U.S., my soul fed off these 7 young men that would suffice until I could return. I put this one GIF here because he's got a very animated laugh. And I also have a very animated laugh to the point where I will sometimes slam a table, or I've even bumped my head because I was laughing so hard. And so to see this in somebody else in a media form was so validating and gratifying. So last year I returned. I spent 2 weeks in quarantine. I visited Hybe and experienced Muster on the last day in Seoul. And Muster is when BTS kind of musters their troops, army, on their anniversary, which is June 13th, 2013. During that time, one of the members, V, requested that we use our phones as lights in hopes that if we were in our little space watching this concert, which was only shown online, and we were doing this out our window, that maybe other armies would see that too. I had never felt adequate enough to try and learn Korean. But from my first days in 2014, I found just closing my eyes on the subway and listening to the hushed conversations in Korean so comforting. Listening to BTS songs became my salve in a time of great despair. And I would start trying to learn the language. You see, these boys have brought me full circle, feeling more pride in a country that once sent me away. There's Yoongi, or Suga, who advocates for LGBTQ rights. And their storylines have included adoptee narratives. For instance, this one piece here that you see animated is from one of their they do like narratives in their videos, music videos, and this was from one of those narratives of one of them being an adoptee, basically abandoned. And then the puzzle piece that you see here, I imagine myself as a puzzle piece that's been lost in some dark corner somewhere. It was batted around by the cat, and it's rough around the edges. I hope that someday my little battered puzzle piece will fit back into Korea's puzzle, but I know it'll be loose and I won't fit in quite properly, but I will be a part of that puzzle. As all Army know, it's a journey that will never end, and yet I no longer need to satisfy anyone else. The importance lies in loving myself and who I am. I'll leave you with this lovely image of, again, a very joyful boy and also a very sleepy couple of boys. But if you ever get a chance, I highly recommend watching Run BTS videos of the boys. And that is it. I know you guys saw a lot of this resources slide before. I thank you so much for joining me this evening. I had hoped that the conference would eventually post the original presentation, but I have a feeling they just had so much stuff that they weren't able to do that. So I wanted to be able to share this with everyone so that you would have the opportunity to see it too. And I do thank all the armies that have provided me with so much laughter in their content. And again, I can't. I now feel a part of something, and a lot of that has to do with these 7 boys and their fans. And I know it sounds crazy, but y'all know I'm crazy anyway. So I hope you enjoyed that. And again, I apologize for how crazy the beginning of this was. I do wish you all well. And once again, I thank you for being here. And hopefully we can talk again soon. And I'm sorry. I apologize for the way this actually happened. So I'll edit it and then I'll repost it if you do want to see it again, or if you want to see it without all the craziness. But thanks again for coming. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and best to everyone. Be well. Have a great holiday season, and check in and say hi. Thanks. Bye.